The winter of 1925 was harsh in Brooklyn. A biting wind howled through the narrow streets, slipping through the cracks of apartment windows and sending chills through the young children who huddled around their families' tiny kitchen stoves for warmth. The city never slept, but for families like the Blooms, it moved at a pace that was dictated by the struggle to survive. Sylvia Bloom was just a little girl, but she was already aware of the weight of responsibility. Her parents had come to America from Eastern Europe, carrying only their hopes and the few belongings they could fit in a suitcase. The land of opportunity was not kind to immigrants, but the Blooms were resilient. Sylvia watched her father labor day and night, scraping by as a factory worker, while her mother took on sewing jobs from neighbors. They never spoke of struggle in front of her, but she could see it in their tired eyes and the way her mother carefully counted every penny before buying bread. School was Sylvia's escape. While other children played in the streets after class, she sat by the window, poring over books borrowed from the local library. Her parents had told her that education was the only way to rise above their circumstances, and she took those words to heart. She wasn't the smartest student in class nor the fastest learner, but she was the most determined. At the age of 10, she began to take on small tasks for her neighbors, running errands, cleaning, and sometimes even writing letters for those who couldn't read or write English. She was learning a valuable lesson. Even the smallest actions could earn her money. By the time she was 14, Sylvia had started working part-time, helping out at a local grocery store after school. The Great Depression had left no one untouched, and she knew her family needed the extra income. She never complained about the long hours or the exhaustion. If anything, she felt proud that she could contribute. One evening, as she walked home from work, she overheard two men talking outside a newspaper stand. "The banks failed again. People are losing everything," one of them muttered. The words struck something deep inside her. She didn't fully understand how money worked, but she knew one thing. She never wanted to be at the mercy of the system. That night, as she lay in bed, she made a silent promise to herself. She would learn everything there was to know about money, not just how to earn it, but how to keep it. Sylvia Bloom didn't just want to survive. She wanted to thrive. By the time Sylvia Bloom turned 16, the world around her was changing. The grip of the Great Depression had begun to loosen, but its lessons remained etched in her mind. Money was fragile, and security was an illusion. She watched families lose their homes, men struggle to find work, and businesses close overnight. She refused to let that be her fate. Every evening after work, she would sit at the kitchen table, watching her father carefully handle the family's finances. He stretched every dollar, ensuring that there was always enough for rent, food, and emergencies. Sylvia observed him closely, memorizing every decision he made. "I don't trust banks," he told her one evening, his voice low and firm. "They take your money and gamble with it. Then when things go bad, they shut their doors and leave you with nothing." Sylvia listened, but wasn't convinced. There had to be a way to make money work for you rather than constantly living in fear of losing it. Determined to find out, she began asking questions. At the grocery store where she worked, she struck up conversations with customers who seemed well off. She listened as businessmen chatted about stocks and investments, memorizing terms she didn't yet understand. By 17, she had saved enough to enroll in night classes at Hunter College while continuing to work during the day. The schedule was brutal. Grocery shifts in the morning, school at night, but she never once considered quitting. During her first economics class, she had an epiphany. Money wasn't just about earning and saving, it was about multiplying. She was introduced to the concept of investments, of making money grow through stocks and bonds. She learned that the wealthiest people weren't just working harder, they were working smarter. That night, she returned home and pulled out every old newspaper she had collected. She flipped to the business section, scanning stock prices, company names, and financial predictions. It was all a mystery to her, but she was determined to crack the code. Meanwhile, at school, she kept her head down and worked harder than ever. She was surrounded by students who came from wealthier backgrounds, young women who had the luxury of focusing solely on their education. Sylvia, on the other hand, was constantly exhausted, juggling school, work, and family responsibilities. But the exhaustion fueled her. She had no safety net, no fallback plan. This was her only chance, and she wouldn't waste it. Then, one evening at the grocery store, she overheard something that would change the course of her life. A man in a suit leaned against the counter, speaking to a friend. "If you really want to make money, forget starting a business," he said. "Get close to people who already have it. That's where the real knowledge is." It was a casual remark, one the man probably forgot as soon as he left the store. But Sylvia never forgot it. She realized that if she wanted to understand how the rich handled money, she had to be near them, watch them, study them, and learn their habits. It was then that she made a decision. She wouldn't just settle for any job after graduation. She would work somewhere where the wealthy played their games, somewhere like Wall Street. Sylvia Bloom stepped off the subway onto Wall Street for the first time in 1947, gripping her handbag tightly. The towering buildings cast long shadows over the streets, where men in crisp suits hurried between offices, their conversations clipped and urgent. The air smelled of ink, paper, and ambition. She had done it. After years of balancing work and night classes, she had graduated from Hunter College. She wasn't the top student, nor the most connected, but she had something far more valuable: relentless determination. Through sheer persistence, she had landed a job as a legal secretary at Cleary, Gottlieb, Friendly and Cox, a young but promising Wall Street law firm. She was only the third employee. At first, the work seemed simple: typing contracts, organizing documents, answering phones. But Sylvia knew better. She had no intention of staying just a secretary. This was her classroom, and the wealthy businessmen around her were her teachers. She listened, always listened. Each day she watched as her bosses made decisions that involved vast sums of money, negotiating deals, buying stocks, investing in companies. She memorized everything: how they spoke, the terms they used, the patterns in their investments. But she wasn't just observing. Sylvia had learned a trick from her time at the grocery store. If you asked the right questions, people would give you more information than they realized. So, when a lawyer mentioned buying shares in a company, she would casually ask, "Oh, what does that company do?" If another talked about bonds, she would say, "I heard bonds are tricky. Is that true?" Every answer gave her a little more knowledge, a little more insight. Then she noticed something fascinating. Whenever the partners at the firm made investments, they often asked her to place the orders with their brokers. "Buy me 500 shares of this," one would say. Sell 200 shares of that, another would instruct. They treated it like routine work, but Sylvia paid attention. She noted which stocks they were buying, how often they traded, and which companies they trusted with their money. And then she made the most important decision of her life. She started investing, too. She couldn't afford to buy in the same amounts as the lawyers. 500 shares? Impossible. But she could buy 5 shares. Using the small salary she earned, she mirrored their trades in the tiniest amounts. If they were putting money into a company, she put a little in, too. If they pulled out, she did the same. No one noticed. She was invisible to them, just the secretary handling their papers. But she was using their knowledge, their own game, to quietly build her own fortune. Day by day, trade by trade, her account started to grow. Sylvia never spoke of it, not to her colleagues, not to her husband, not to anyone, because she had a plan, and she knew that patience was the key. She wasn't in this for quick money. She was in this for life. For most people, making money is an exciting event, something to celebrate, something to show off. But Sylvia Bloom knew better. She had spent years studying the rich, and she had learned one undeniable truth. The loudest people lost the fastest. So she stayed quiet. By the 1950s, she had built a portfolio that was slowly growing, but no one, not her bosses, not her husband, not even her closest friends, had any idea. She lived exactly as she always had, taking the subway to work, packing her lunch, wearing the same conservative clothes year after year. Her colleagues often joked about her frugality. "She must have a mattress stuffed with cash," one lawyer once chuckled as she politely declined an expensive lunch outing. Sylvia just smiled. If only they knew. Every morning she walked into the firm, sat at her desk, and typed up the very contracts that helped the firm's wealthy clients amass their fortunes. Deals worth millions passed through her hands, but no one ever thought that she, the quiet secretary in the corner, was quietly playing the same game. She didn't just invest randomly. She had learned discipline. While many of the lawyers at the firm made risky bets, chasing stocks that soared and crashed, Sylvia focused on stability. She bought shares in companies with strong track records, companies that paid dividends, companies that grew slowly but surely. Her golden rule? Never touch the principal. She reinvested every dividend. When a stock increased in value, she didn't cash out. She held. And when the market crashed, as it did in the late 1950s, she did something most people couldn't. She stayed calm. The financial markets were ruthless, but Sylvia had prepared for that. She had seen what panic did to people. She had watched as some of the firm's wealthiest clients lost everything because they couldn't control their emotions. Sylvia wasn't like them. She wasn't playing for status. She wasn't playing for luxury. She was playing for security. And security didn't come from spending. It came from control. Still, as her investments grew, a part of her wondered if she was doing the right thing by keeping her success a secret. She had married Raymond Margolis, a kind and hard-working man who had spent years as a firefighter before becoming a school teacher and later a pharmacist. Raymond was just like her, practical, humble, uninterested in extravagance. Their life together was simple. They lived in the same rent-controlled Brooklyn apartment for decades, never moving, never upgrading. One evening, as they sat at their tiny kitchen table, Raymond sighed and rubbed his eyes. "I was thinking," he said, "maybe it's time to retire soon. We don't have much, but We've got enough to be comfortable." Sylvia sipped her tea, nodding. She could have told him the truth right then. Could have told him that they didn't just have enough. They had more than enough. But she didn't. Not because she didn't trust him. Not because she didn't love him. But because she knew how the world worked. The moment people knew about money, their behavior changed. Even the most disciplined, the most logical, the most responsible, they changed. So she did what she had always done. She kept silent, and she kept building. The years passed, and Sylvia Bloom's wealth continued to grow, quietly, invisibly, deliberately. While others climbed the corporate ladder, seeking titles and prestige, she remained at her desk, typing, filing, listening. She watched lawyers come and go, some rising to great wealth, others crashing spectacularly when greed got the better of them. But Sylvia, she never gambled. She stuck to her plan. The key was patience. No sudden moves, no desperate risks. When the stock market surged in the 1960s, she didn't celebrate. When it crashed in the 1970s, she didn't panic. She just kept investing, reinvesting, letting time work its magic. She could have bought a penthouse overlooking Central Park. She could have retired decades earlier. But instead, she continued to take the subway every morning, packed her lunch, and returned home to her modest Brooklyn apartment. It was a small, unassuming life. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. Even as the wealth quietly piled up, she never changed. She still clipped coupons. She still wore the same clothes she had worn for years. She still refused to take taxis, even when it rained. Her colleagues would laugh, shaking their heads. "She must be saving for something big," one of them joked. If only they knew. She wasn't saving for herself. She was saving for something far greater. A silent partnership. Raymond, her husband, never questioned their simple lifestyle. He was a man content with what they had, happy to live within their means. As they grew older, they watched friends and neighbors chase after more. More money, more luxury, more status. But Sylvia knew that true wealth wasn't seen. It wasn't in fancy cars or designer clothes. It was in security. It was in freedom. And most of all, it was in giving back. She had spent decades surrounded by people who had too much, yet they always wanted more. But she had also seen those who had too little, struggling the way her own family once had. And that was where her heart truly was. By the time she was in her 80s, her portfolio had crossed into the millions. She had never told a soul, not her colleagues, not her friends, not even Raymond. Then one evening, as she and Raymond sat together in their tiny apartment, he sighed and rubbed his hands together. "I wonder what we'll leave behind," he murmured. "I wish we could have done more." Sylvia looked at him, her expression unreadable. She had always kept her wealth a secret. But soon the world would know. The years pressed on, and Sylvia Bloom's secret remained just that, a secret. She had spent a lifetime watching fortunes rise and fall, studying the patterns of wealth, understanding its power and its danger. She had seen people destroy themselves chasing more, and others crumble under the weight of too little. And so she had lived her life with balance. Even as she entered her 90s, she still took the subway to work. She still packed her lunch. She still declined invitations to expensive outings, brushing them off with a polite smile. No one, not her colleagues, not her neighbors, not even her beloved Raymond before he passed, had any idea of the vast fortune she had built. She had never needed luxury. She had needed purpose. And now it was time to reveal it. The revelation: in 2016, at the age of 96, Sylvia Bloom quietly passed away. There was no grand farewell, no extravagant funeral, just a small service attended by those who had known her as the quiet, modest woman from Brooklyn, the secretary who had worked at the law firm for 67 years, the woman who never asked for much. It was only after her passing that the truth came out. Her estate, meticulously organized and documented, revealed something that stunned everyone. Sylvia Bloom had amassed a fortune of over $9 million. No one could believe it. How could a simple secretary, someone who had never owned a car, never moved out of her small rent-controlled apartment, never even splurged on taxes, have built such an incredible fortune? A legacy of giving. But the real shock wasn't the amount. It was what she had done with it. Sylvia didn't leave her wealth to distant relatives or hoard it for an unknown heir. Instead, she had carefully arranged for the vast majority of it to go toward scholarships for underprivileged students, young men and women who, like her, had dreams but lacked the means to chase them. She left $6.24 million to the Henry Street Settlement on the Lower East Side, the largest single estate gift in its history, to create the Bloom Margolis Scholarship Fund, named after her and her late husband. She gave $2 million to Hunter College, the school that had allowed her to study at night while working during the day. She had lived her life frugally, not because she had to, but because she had a bigger plan all along. The story of Sylvia Bloom spread quickly. News outlets covered it in disbelief. How could a woman who had worked quietly in the background of Wall Street outinvest the very people she worked for? How could someone so unassuming leave behind a legacy that would change lives for generations? The answer was simple. Sylvia Bloom had never wanted more for herself. She had wanted more for others. She had spent a lifetime watching wealth, how it was gained, how it was lost, how it was wasted. And in the end, she had done something with it that most people never do. She had used it to make the world better. The final lesson. Her story became an inspiration, a lesson in patience, discipline, and the quiet power of generosity. The lawyers at her old firm, the colleagues who once joked about her frugality, the people who had seen her as nothing more than a humble secretary, they all realized they had been wrong. Sylvia Bloom had played the long game, and in the end, she had won. The end.